Warrantless stingray surveillance is becoming more common in the status quo, Klonick 14. One of the tools making it possible for Chief Wiggum to gather all your deets is known colloquially as a stingray. A stingray mimics a cell phone tower and forces all nearby mobile phones or devices to connect to it. Every phone that connects to the stingray reports its number, GPS location, and the numbers of all outgoing calls and texts, all without a warrant. Local police have been acquiring stingrays in increasing numbers. At least 46 state and local police departments, from Sunrise, Florida to Hennepin, Minnesota, have gotten cell-site simulators. Like the federal government, local police are using this technology without any judicial oversight. That means that Barney Fife could walk into your neighborhood with a stingray, fire it up, and collect all the numbers, GPS, and call logs of every cell phone in the area. If they're looking for a specific number, they can also use a stingray to trick your phone into being a personal GPS tracker and then use that warrantless cell phone tracking to enter your home and arrest you, again, without a warrant. Stingray capture data in an intrusive and unconstitutional manner. They should be banned for violating the Fourth Amendment. ACLU 14. Federal, state, and law enforcement entities across the country are using a powerful cell phone surveillance tool commonly referred to as a stingray. These devices can be configured to capture the content of voice and data communications. Although the federal government has been using these devices since at least 1995 and use by governments quite widespread, there are only a handful of opinions addressing their use. Few criminal defense attorneys are aware of these highly intrusive but extremely common surveillance tools. This is entirely understandable because the federal government has a policy of not disclosing information about this device. The government appears to be withholding information from criminal defendants. It even appears to be providing misleading information and making material omissions to judicial officers when it seeks purported court authorization to use this device. The secrecy surrounding these devices is deeply troubling because this technology raises grave constitutional questions. There's a compelling argument that stingrays should never be used. Because they operate in dragnet fashion, they engage in the electronic equivalent of the general searches prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. Stingray surveillance violates Americans' Fourth Amendment privacy rights. Fakhoury 12. These devices allow the government to conduct broad searches amounting to general warrants, the exact type of search the Fourth Amendment was written to prevent. A stingray could potentially be beamed into all the houses in one neighborhood looking for a particular signal. The Fourth Amendment was enacted to prevent these general fishing expeditions. They are essentially allowing the government to enter into the home via a cellular signal at law enforcement's discretion and rummage at will without any supervision. The government can't simply use technology to upend centuries of constitutional law to conduct a search they would be prevented from doing physically. When police use a stingray, it's not just the suspect's phone information the device sucks up, but all the innocent people around such suspect as well. Some devices have a range of several kilometers, meaning potentially thousands of people could have their privacy violated despite not being suspected of any crime. Stingrays destroy the privacy rights that are a necessary ingredient of effective democracy, McFarland 12. Privacy, as protection from excessive scrutiny, is necessary if individuals are to be free to be themselves. Everyone needs some room to break social norms, to engage in small, permissible deviations that help define a person's individuality. People need to be able to think outrageous thoughts, make scandalous statements, and pick their noses once in a while. They need to be able to behave in ways that are not dictated to them by the surrounding society. If every appearance, action, word, and thought of theirs is captured and posted on a social network visible to the rest of the world, they'll lose that freedom to be themselves. This ability to develop one's unique individuality is especially important in a democracy which values and depends on creativity, nonconformism, and the free interchange of diverse ideas. That is where a democracy gets its vitality. Thus, as Weston has observed, the democratic society relies on publicity as a control over government and on privacy as a shield for group and individual life. Today, a more serious threat to freedom comes from the governments and other large institutions. Over the last century, governments have developed sophisticated methods of surveillance as a means of controlling their subjects. Constitutional violations like stingray will create an unstoppable police state if they are not stopped. Whitehead 12. Advanced technology now provides government agents and police officers with the ability to track our every move. The surveillance state is our new society. There's nowhere to hide. Using stingray devices, federal agents track the cell phones of unsuspecting people. Agents are able to track down the whereabouts of the person holding it. These surveillance sweeps target all cell phone signals, not just those of criminal suspects. This lack of concern for the Fourth Amendment, which requires reasonable suspicion that you're up to something illegal before the police conduct surveillance on you, is widely shared among federal and state courts. Our private data is not actually private. The federal government claims that knowing our personal information is critical to preserving national security. Life as we know it will only get worse. These tools have the potential to make computer cables as dangerous as police batons. This, of course, has some ominous implications. Stingray devices are used in racially biased ways, Cyril 15. Surveillance data has historically been overused to repress dissidents, monitor perceived criminality, and perpetually maintain an impoverished underclass. Surveillance frequently includes the indiscriminate collection of the private data of people targeted by race but not involved in any crime. In a racially discriminatory criminal justice system, surveillance technologies reproduce injustice. Instead of reducing discrimination, predictive policing is a face of what author Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, a de facto system of separate and unequal application of laws, police practices, conviction rates, sentencing terms, and conditions of confinement that operate more as a system of social control by racial hierarchy than as a crime prevention or punishment. They will use Stingray cell phone interceptors. Predictive policing doesn't just lead to racial and religious profiling, it relies on it. Suspicious activities reporting and the dragnet approach of fusion centers target communities of color. The NSA and FBI have engaged local law enforcement agencies and electronic surveillance technology to spy on Muslims living in the United States, but the widest net is cast over black communities. Black defendants are at least 30% more likely to be in prison than whites for the same crime. As surveillance technologies are increasingly adopted and integrated by law enforcement agencies today, racial disparities are being made invisible by a media environment that has failed to tell the story of surveillance in the context of structural racism. We're living in an incredible time when migrant activists have blocked deportation buses and a movement for black lives has emerged, and when women, queer, and trans experiences have been placed right at the center. The decentralized power of the internet makes that possible. But the internet also makes possible the high-tech surveillance that threatens to drive structural racism into the 21st century. We can help Black Lives Matter by ensuring that technology is not used to cement a racial hierarchy. Racial profiling destroys communities and promotes segregation. Calebrese and Fulton 12. Racial profiling forces individuals who have engaged in no wrongdoing to endure the burdens of law enforcement in order to prove their innocence. Alienation is a common consequence of being profiled. Exposure to racial profiling has behavioral as well as emotional consequences. Many minorities who are entirely innocent of any wrongdoing choose to drive in certain automobiles and on certain routes, or to dress in certain clothes to avoid drawing the attention of police who might otherwise profile and stop them. Or they choose to live in areas where they will not stand out as much, thereby reinforcing patterns of residential segregation. We have a moral obligation to stop racial profiling. It is dehumanizing and prevents justice from being served. U.S. DOJ 03. Racial profiling sends the dehumanizing message to our citizens that they are judged by the color of their skin. It harms the criminal justice system by eviscerating the trust that is necessary if law enforcement is to effectively protect our communities. America has a moral obligation to prohibit racial profiling. Race-based assumptions in law enforcement perpetuate negative racial stereotypes that are harmful to our diverse democracy and materially impair our efforts to maintain a fair and just society. Racial profiling creates a lose-lose situation because it destroys the potential for underlying trust. Any instance of racial profiling by a few damages our criminal justice system. When law enforcement practices are perceived to be biased or unfair, the general public and especially minority communities are less willing to trust and confide in officers, report crimes, be witnesses at trials, or serve on juries. Racial profiling is discrimination, and it taints the entire criminal justice system. Racial profiling destroys community trust in police, which is essential to public safety. Natarajan 14. Profiling undermines public safety and strains police community trust. When law enforcement officers target residents based on race, religion, or national origin rather than behavior, crime fighting is less effective and community distrust of police grows. A study of the Los Angeles Police Department showed that minority communities that had been unfairly targeted in the past continue to experience greater mistrust and fear of police officers. Racial profiling is a counterproductive law enforcement strategy. Calebrese and Fulton 12. Racial profiling is in all contexts a flawed law enforcement tactic that actually decreases the hit rate for catching criminals. Racial profiling is a tactic that diverts and misuses precious law enforcement resources. The use of racial profiling diverts law enforcement resources away from investigations of individuals who have been linked to terrorist activity by specific and credible evidence. Racial characteristics of individuals might cause law enforcement officials to ignore suspicious behavior, past or present, by someone who did not fit the racial profile. Ending racial profiling will result in the more efficient deployment of law enforcement resources. An additional reason why racial profiling is not an effective law enforcement tactic is that it destroys the relationship between local law enforcement authorities and the communities that they serve. Respect and trust between law enforcement authorities and immigrant communities are essential to successful police work. Racial profiling has a destructive impact on minority communities. The use of racial profiling alienates the very people that federal authorities have deemed instrumental in the anti-terrorism fight. Police use of stingray devices violates the FCC approval of these devices. Benson, 14. The FCC should be reevaluating these grants of authority, Wessler told me. If the FCC investigated this possibility and found they were misled in how the stingray would be used by police, they could revoke the authorization for police departments using such technology. And from what they can tell, today's use of stingray lies in sharp contrast with how they were approved. The FCC has technical expertise in regulating telecommunications networks to protect privacy. Genikowski, 11. Technology can and must be part of the solution, and as the government's expert agency on broadband and communication networks with a long history of taking common-sense steps to protect consumer privacy, the FCC has an important role to play going forward. Our network-focused privacy and data security rules are settled and legally tested. There's no meaningful court oversight of stingray devices because the FBI keeps their use hidden through non-disclosure agreements with local cops. FBI 2012. The Erie County Sheriff's Office shall not, in any civil or criminal proceeding, use or provide any information concerning the Hirsh Corporation wireless collection equipment, including but not limited to during pretrial matters, in search warrants and related affidavits, in discovery, in response to court-ordered disclosure, in other affidavits, in grand jury hearings, in the state's case in chief, rebuttal, or on appeal, or in testimony in any phase of civil or criminal trial without prior written approval of the FBI. If the Erie County Sheriff's Office learns that a district attorney, prosecutor, or a court is considering or intends to use or provide any information concerning the Hirsh Corporation wireless collection equipment in a manner that will cause law enforcement sensitive information relating to the technology to be made known to the public, the Erie County Sheriff's Office will immediately notify the FBI in order to allow sufficient time for the FBI to intervene to protect the equipment and information from disclosure. Courts will not hold lying cops accountable. Farivar, 14. Realistically, the biggest risk to the government is that the judge is miffed and so views future warrant requests with greater skepticism, Kate said. Theoretically, the judge could hold the requesting officer in contempt or could ask the Justice Department to investigate, which in theory lead to termination or criminal prosecution. That will never happen, not with this administration. After all, if the Director of National Intelligence can lie to Congress without consequences, surely a law enforcement official can deceive a court without worrying about consequences. Cops purposefully mislead courts about their use of stingray surveillance. Pell Soghoian, 14. Despite the fact that U.S. government agencies have used cellular surveillance devices for more than 20 years, only 2 known published magistrate opinions address law enforcement use of this technology. Judge Owsley indicated that federal agents may frequently obfuscate the planned use of a stingray in authorization requests. In Tacoma, Washington, the local police have used stingray surveillance devices since 2009 and insist that they only do so with approval from a judge. When asked, however, the presiding judge of the local superior court told a reporter that the stingray equipment had not been mentioned in any warrant application that he has seen. He also revealed that other judges in his court were similarly surprised to hear that the Tacoma police were using the technology, stating that the judges never heard of it. That prosecutors have not made this information clear to judges often appears to be an intentional action. In Sarasota, police have enacted a policy of describing stingray-derived intelligence in depositions and reports as information from a confidential source regarding the location of the suspect. This policy is intended to shield information about the stingray. By including misleading information in court documents, the police are preventing the courts from having a true understanding of the electronic surveillance that is being conducted under their watch. Surveillance is not truly aimed at terrorists, but at collecting information on innocent civilians. Brzezinski, 13. Surveillance systems are best suited for gathering information on law-abiding citizens. Monitoring phone calls is hardly the way to catch terrorists. Modern-day terrorists are aware of the available technology. The government's efforts are much more dangerous to civil liberties than they are to Al-Qaeda and other organizations like it. Mass data collection like what Stingray is capable of does not keep us safe. Levinson-Waldman, 13. This kind of dragnet-style data capture simply doesn't keep us safe. Intelligence and law enforcement agencies are increasingly drowning in data. The more that comes in, the harder it is to stay afloat. The failure of the intelligence community to intercept the 2009 underwear bomber was blamed in large part on a surfeit of information. According to an official White House review, a significant amount of critical information was embedded in large volume of other data. That the crushing volume of information was one of the factors that hampered the FBI's analysis before the problem is that the system is clogged with information, a lot of data clogging the system with no value. The NSA itself was brought to a grinding halt by the torrent of data pouring into the system, leaving the agency brain dead for half a week and unable to process information. The U.S. is losing the war on terror, Miller 15. Terrorism trend lines were worse than at any other point in history. The assessments reflect a pessimism that has descended on the U.S. counterterrorism community over the past year amid a series of discouraging developments. Among them are the growth of the Islamic State, the ongoing influx of foreign fighters into Syria, the collapse of the U.S.-backed government in Yemen, and the downward spiral of Libya. The adjusted outlook contrasts sharply with the surge of optimism that followed the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. Upbeat characterizations have all but evaporated. Passing the plan will make us safer because Stingray devices allow actual criminals to walk free, Upriser 14. FBI just let another criminal walk rather than give details of their cell phone spying system, Stingray. They'd apparently rather let suspects go free than reveal in court the details of the high-tech tracker. The FBI instructed the police to drop criminal charges instead of revealing any information concerning the cell site simulator or its use. Everything else is a mystery because police agencies have non-disclosure agreements with the maker of Stingrays. There have been several examples of prosecutors dropping charges to keep quiet about Stingrays. The plan is not needed because the FBI is already starting to address possible Stingray abuses. Barret 15. The Justice Department will start revealing more about the government's use of secret cell phone tracking devices and has launched a wide-ranging review into how law enforcement agencies deploy the technology, according to justice officials. In recent months, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has begun getting search warrants from judges to use the devices, which hunt criminal suspects by locating their cell phones. For years, FBI agents didn't get warrants to use the tracking devices. Senior officials have also decided they must be more forthcoming about how and why the devices are used. The plan is not needed because courts are already starting to address possible Stingray abuses. Supreme Court of Florida 14. We conclude that Tracy had a subjective expectation of privacy in the location signals transmitted to enable the personal use of his cell phone. Therefore, we hold that the use of information emanating from his cell phone in order to track him in real time was a search for which probable cause was required. Because probable cause did not support the search in this case and no warrant authorized the use of Tracy's cell site location information to track him, the evidence was subject to suppression. Stingray devices aren't a serious threat to innocent people because they release non-target devices. Zetter 15. Once the Stingray obtains the unique ID of a device, it releases it so it can connect to a legitimate cell tower, allowing data and voice calls to go through. As each phone tries to connect, the Stingray will say, "I'm really busy right now, so go use a different tower." So rather than catching the phone, it will release it, says Pell Soghoian, chief technologist for the ACLU. The moment it tries to connect, the Stingray can reject every single phone that is not the target phone. The whole idea of privacy is not helpful for deciding whether state actions are appropriate or not. Nussbaum, 2000. Privacy is simply too diffuse and unclear a concept to serve any useful legal role. It's so extremely amorphous that judgments of what fall under it are likely to be arbitrary and willful. Arbitrary judgments are especially likely to express the current arrangement of power. The Press Commission of India opined that privacy is a very nebulous concept and criteria which may constitute its violation cannot be drawn up. Rajiv Dhawan summarizes the situation this way. So far, the concept of privacy has been used as a persuasive linguistic device. Privacy is a nice-sounding emotive phrase which persuades people that the court is doing nice things. But the special problem that arises is that privacy covers a large number of distinct areas of law: the law of the press, the law of torts, laws relating to housing, and in the area of modesty, the criminal law. It seems far better to demarcate precisely what citizens have a right to and a right to be free from in each of these areas, rather than assert that they have a right to privacy. The idea of privacy is especially harmful to women. Nussbaum, 2000. The central argument in Catherine McKinnon's critique of privacy is that appeals to privacy have usually functioned to insulate bad behavior from state scrutiny. Appeals to the alleged privacy of the home have been used to defend the exemption of marital rape from sexual assault laws and to discourage state interference with domestic violence or child abuse. It is not the woman's privacy that is being protected here, it is the man's privacy. Feminist critics look at the history of the distinction between public and private and see in it a stratagem through which men have claimed for themselves an unlimited exercise of power, among whose primary uses has been to subordinate women. The Greek distinction between the polis and the oikos, one of the most foundational sources of our modern ideas of public and private, functioned exactly this way. As Aristotle articulates it, it is the distinction between a sphere in which a man is an equal among equals and a sphere in which he rules as a king. The private domain is thus defined as a domain in which the powerful have a sway unlimited by considerations of equality and reciprocity. Racial profiling is subconscious. The plan does nothing to address the cause, so it will continue even if the plan is in effect. Stone 10. The problem is that stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination are not entirely conscious and under our control. People tend to use race and ethnicity when they interact with others without knowing it, and this leads to subconscious forms of racial and ethnic bias. How can people be racist when they interact daily across racial and ethnic boundaries? When these thoughts and feelings operate outside of awareness, people can express hate and discrimination without realizing it. Our brain has a leaky seal that drops hints of dislike when we interact with people who are racially or ethnically different from us. When playing a shooter-style video game, people are more likely to accidentally shoot an unarmed black person than a white person. Some of these studies have been done with police officers who are trained to avoid making such mistakes because of racial profiling. There are many examples of racial profiling that don't involve stingray surveillance and which the plan can't fix. Houston Police Department 15. Racial profiling is any law enforcement-initiated action based on an individual's race, rather than on behavior. Examples of racial profiling include, but are not limited to, initiating a motor vehicle stop on a vehicle because of the race of the driver, stopping the driver of a vehicle based on the determination that a person of that race is unlikely to own that specific model of vehicle, or stopping an individual based on the determination that a person of that race does not belong in a specific part of town. Banning stingray devices won't work. The people who would enforce the ban don't know enough about the technology to effectively keep them from operating. Assange et al. 12. Democratic states are massively buying machines that allow them to act exactly outside the law in regard to interception because they don't need a court decision, they can just switch it on and do it, and this technology can't be controlled. There will always be a lack of political will to expose state spying, and the technology is inherently so complex and its use in practice so secret that there cannot be meaningful democratic oversight. Once you've erected the surveillance, given that it is complex, given that it is designed to operate in secret, it's just not going to happen. It's too cheap and too easy to get around political accountability and to actually perform interception. Complexity and secrecy are a toxic mix. Hidden by complexity, hidden by secrecy, unaccountability is built in. You can't challenge the surveillance state, it works hard to protect itself. Stanley 13. Perpetuation, protection, and expansion of self. Like all life forms, bureaucracies seek to perpetuate themselves, and just as species seek to spread their genes, bureaucracies seek to expand their budgets, payrolls, powers, and domain, as political scientists have long noted. The FBI and NSA push for new surveillance powers. By the same token, bureaucracies will generally do whatever it takes to protect their core interests and will rarely, if ever, be seen sacrificing themselves, not for principle, or truth, or justice, or morality. The FCC will make it easy to get around the plan because they can't say no to the wireless industry. Alster 15. There's no question that the government has been under the influence of industry. The FCC is a captured agency. That's a term that comes up time and time again with the FCC. Captured agencies are essentially controlled by the industries they're supposed to regulate. A detailed look at FCC actions and non-actions shows that over the years, the FCC has granted the wireless industry pretty much what it has wanted. Counterterrorism is successful now because of Obama's tough approach. Benin 15. Republican criticisms of Obama feature familiar talking points. The president isn't aggressive enough. His approach must be tougher. But the gap between GOP rhetoric and national security reality continues to grow. A U.S. airstrike killed Nasir al-Wuhayshi, al-Qaeda's number 2 official and the top guy in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. His death is a huge deal, especially given the terrorist plots al-Wuhayshi has helped oversee. The death of Wuhayshi is seen by American officials as a major blow to al-Qaeda, which is struggling with decimated ranks and ideological competition. Obama has become the greatest terrorist hunter in the history of the presidency. Obama's counterterrorism strategy includes so many successes, they no longer generate much attention. It's not about winning or losing in absolute terms. The US is doing well and far better than if softer intel approaches like the plan were used, Zenko 15. If I look across the board since 9/11, if the United States were not as engaged against the terrorists, I think we would be facing a horrendous environment. They would have taken full advantage of the opportunities that they have had across the region. To summarize, the war on terrorism is working compared to inaction or other policies. Stingray-type surveillance is necessary. Banning it will destroy our ability to fight terrorism and protect our citizens. Sulmasy 13. The current threat by al-Qaeda and jihadists is one that requires aggressive intelligence collection and efforts. This 21st century war is different and requires new ways and methods of gathering information. As technology has increased, so has our ability to gather valuable, often actionable intelligence. The move towards homegrown terror will necessarily require, by accident or purposefully, collection of U.S. citizens' conversations. The United States needs to use this technology to protect itself. This truth is naturally uncomfortable for a country with a constitution that prevents the federal government from conducting unreasonable searches and seizures. But what might have been unreasonable 10 years ago is not the same any longer. Without Stingray-style surveillance devices, terrorists will be able to remain anonymous. Gamma Group 11. Cellular networks have created a haven for criminals and terrorists. Over GSM and 3G networks, criminals and terrorists can remain anonymous, able to continue illegal activities on a global scale without fear of action because no local registration is required. Criminals are able to use prepaid SIM cards or foreign SIM cards without the need to supply any information. And post-paid subscription fraud. Criminals are easily able to reprogram phones with a fake identity or use stolen phones and SIM cards. We are able to overcome these challenges in order to 1. Identify and locate GSM target cell phones. 2. Identify and locate 3G target cell phones. 3. Intercept the voice and SMS communications of designated targets. Information we get from surveillance is vital to preventing terrorist plots, which are even more complex after 9/11. A ban would weaken our defenses. Hirsh 13. Intelligence officials and terrorism experts today believe that the death of bin Laden only set the stage for a rebirth of al-Qaeda as a global threat. Its tactics have morphed into something increasingly dangerous. Agencies' opponents may not realize that the practice they most hope to stop, its seemingly indiscriminate scouring of phone data and emails, is precisely what intelligence officials need to detect plots. The only hope to track them all is an exceptionally deep, organized, and free-ranging intelligence apparatus. Counterterrorism is vital. Terrorists will go nuclear if we let our guard down. Brill Luongo 12. There is a consensus among international leaders that the threat of nuclear terrorism is real. Numerous experts have called nuclear terrorism one of the most serious threats to global security and stability. It is also preventable. A terrorist nuclear explosion could kill hundreds of thousands, create billions of dollars in damages, and undermine the global economy. An act of nuclear terrorism would thrust tens of millions of people into dire poverty and create a second death toll throughout the developing world. Nuclear terrorism is a real and present danger for all states. Preventing it is an achievable goal.